The birth of a mirage. The Nile moves like a sleeping animal, slow, certain, and older than any crown. Before there was a queen, there was a river. Before there was a legend, there was a city, Alexandria, a lattice of white stone and light designed to impress sailors long before they saw its shore. This story begins where land meets sea and memory meets myth, not with armies, not with fanfare, with a girl who learned early that power often speaks in a whisper. Cleopatra was born into a house that believed in the theater of blood. The Ptolemies, Macedonian by origin and Egyptian by ambition, had ruled for nearly 3 centuries when she arrived. They wrapped themselves in Egypt's symbols, falcons, cobras, lotus crowns, yet kept Greek at their table and Greek in their private thoughts. In this family, love was a costume and marriage was a mask. Brothers could be husbands, sisters could be rivals, and a smile could be strategy. The palace was a school without teachers. The first lesson, survival. The second, silence. Cleopatra learned languages before she learned safety. Greek, the tongue of her ancestors. Egyptian, the tongue of her people. Others, too. Words that opened doors in markets and in courts, that softened enemies and sharpened friends. She learned that language is a bridge you can walk across and, if needed, burn behind you. Alexandria itself was a classroom. The lighthouse stood like a finger pointing to heaven, and the library breathed like an old animal, full of papyrus lungs and voices speaking across centuries. In those halls, scholars weighed stars and kings on the same scale. Cleopatra grew up among them, absorbing more than etiquette. Astronomy turned calendars into power. Medicine turned herbs into leverage. History turned memory into warning. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was a man of music and debt, mocked by some as the flute player, defended by few as a king. He borrowed from Rome and paid with autonomy. Cleopatra watched the price accrue in whispers, new taxes, sold loyalties, promises inked on someone else's parchment. When he was exiled, she learned what exile looks like from the inside, a throne that will seat anyone willing to pay the room fee. When her elder sister Berenice claimed the crown, the city adjusted as cities do. Alexandria is ancient and practical. It learns to bow to whichever sunrise it's given. But when her father returned with Roman backing, the same streets learned the shape of a public execution. Berenice died as an example. Cleopatra did not need a lecture. In her house, lessons were written in people. The child became a listener. Servants talk when doors close. Priests talk when incense burns. Generals talk when maps unfold. Cleopatra listened to all of them, not to their stories, but to their motives. She learned that the loudest voice in a room is often the one that fears silence the most. By the time her father died and the will unrolled like a snake across the table, Cleopatra understood that crowns are not inheritances, they are auditions. The will named her queen, yes, but not alone. She would rule with a younger brother, appointed co-monarch and, by tradition, husband. Tradition is one word for it. Convenience is another. In that palace, both words meant control. A child king attracts puppeteers.
Courtiers with soft hands and sharp eyes drifted toward her brother like filings to a magnet. They drafted policies with ink that wiped clean. They told him where to sit, whom to trust, and whom to fear. Cleopatra read their faces and did not correct them. You don't interrupt a tide. You step aside and wait for the beach it leaves. Within months, the palace air changed temperature. Greetings shortened. Doors took longer to open. A queen can feel when a city closes its eyes to her. She was pushed out gently, as if the walls themselves were embarrassed. Exile again, this time hers. Exile is a cold teacher. It removes the ornaments from a person and leaves only the instrument. Cleopatra, stripped of ceremony, found what remained: a voice, a mind sharpened by necessity, a memory that kept score. She gathered what loyalties she could and watched the horizon for the one force that turned kings into clients and maps into suggestions: Rome. Rome was not one thing in those days. It was many heads on one creature, arguing with itself while devouring the world. Senators in white, soldiers in red, accountants in gray. Cleopatra learned their names the way some learn constellations. Some were stars, some were rocks falling in slow motion. Julius Caesar was not a rumor to her. He was an equation, a man who understood that law is a road and ambition is a vehicle, a man who turned calendars into tools and enemies into advertisements, a man who could make an exile a queen again, not because he loved queens, but because he loved leverage. The rug story, the famous rug story, comes later. First comes calculation. Cleopatra did not run to Rome for rescue. She arranged for Rome to trip over her usefulness. Egypt had grain. Grain fed Rome's city poor and Rome's soldiers. Egypt had ships. Ships moved power. Egypt had Cleopatra, who could speak to a crowd and hear in its silence what it would pay for. When the moment finally arrived and the queen met the general, the scene was less romance than geometry. Two vectors intersecting, one of need, one of opportunity. Caesar saw stability in her. Stability he could sell to a Senate that hated chaos unless it brought them land. Cleopatra saw return in him, a return not only to a room with a throne, but to the authority to use it. Some history is a dance you can predict by the first 3 steps. The rest is improvisation. Cleopatra returned to Alexandria not as a guest, but as a decision. Her brother's faction learned that Rome's patience has a price. Streets remember the sound of soldiers more than the sound of arguments. Before the city chose a side, the side chose the city. Restoration tastes different from victory. It tastes like a room you know better than anyone else, pretending not to recognize you. Cleopatra took her chair and, quietly, took stock. The palace was the same shape, the network running through it was not. Appointments had changed, promises had multiplied. She did not start with a purge, she started with a ledger. A monarch governs 3 economies at once: coin, loyalty, and myth. Coin is counted, loyalty is weighed, myth is floated on the exchange of time. Cleopatra adjusted all 3. Temples reopened that her father had neglected. Priests found their rituals respected and their budgets checked. Merchants found trade routes smoothed and tariffs tuned like strings. Farmers found paperwork simplified by a queen who had learned that food is louder than decrees. On coinage, her profile appeared with deliberate imperfection. Not a delicate doll, but a ruler with a nose you would recognize on a statue a century later. Power, not prettiness. On walls, she was painted as Isis, mother and magician, the goddess who reassembled a broken god with patience and breath. The message was not subtle. What was scattered will be gathered. What was lost will be named. Outside Egypt, Rome whispered. Some called her a client. Others called her a problem disguised as a solution. Cleopatra did not correct them. She sent ships instead of explanations. Egypt's exports moved, and with them moved the city's sense of itself. No longer a pawn, not quite a player, but a table others preferred to sit at. In quieter hours, she read. Not for leisure, for weather. Histories are barometers. She studied kings who survived and kings who did not, queens who became adjectives and queens who became eras. She underlined the sentences where a small decision turned empires. She folded corners where a clever ally became a cleverer enemy. Caesar returned to Rome. Her name followed him as rumor, as fascination, as warning. She visited the city and did not demand, she demonstrated. A queen in a private villa beyond the sacred boundary, a loophole with a garden. Rome saw her walk and felt, for a moment, like a province in someone else's empire. Then knives found Caesar in a room where power thought itself safe. News travels at different speeds, grief slow, danger fast. Cleopatra left Rome the way a tide withdraws, so gradually that you doubt it was ever there until your feet find dry sand.
In Alexandria, she stood again at the same window, looking at the same sea. A queen with a child who carried in his name the echo of a man whose calendar would outlive temples. Caesarion, Little Caesar, a syllable that made senators uncomfortable and future emperors cautious. Cleopatra understood that names are fuses. Some you light immediately, some you keep dry. A court remade itself around her. Scholars argued about stars and taxes in the same breath. Sailors brought gossip from Rhodes and Cyprus. Ambassadors changed their robes and rehearsed their smiles. In the market, spice traders invented new adjectives for cinnamon. Everything moves in Alexandria. Even the stillness is busy. She made time to listen to people who could not help her. Fishermen who knew where the river turns stubborn in winter. Midwives who knew when a city was nervous before a census. A ruler who only listens to generals, hears about victories, and finds surprise in losses. Cleopatra preferred fewer surprises. At night, the palace felt like a ship. Wood creaking softly, lamplight swaying, the sense of cutting through something bigger than yourself, with a chart you drew and drew again. She counted the friends who might sell her, and the enemies who might hesitate.
She measured the distance between her and a city that loved her when bread was cheap and roofs were tight against rain. A story often breaks where a stranger enters it. Mark Antony stepped into Cleopatra's like a doorframe does into light. But that is a later chapter. Segment by segment, an empire was a demunging to the shape of her decisions. Taxes were not simply collected, they were explained. Soldiers were not only paid, they were brought home on time. Priests were not flattered, they were audited. The library did not regain what fire had taken, but what remained was catalogued with a rigor that felt like defiance. The queen visited workshops and asked questions without warning. Goldsmiths learned to keep accounts tidy. Scribes learned that ink can be an honest instrument. In a courtyard lined with fig trees, she watched children play the games their grandparents had played, and thought about continuity, that thin rope tying days together, strong enough to pull a people through years that want to swallow them. When storms hit the delta, she diverted grain to the worst-struck districts and made sure the heralds named the villages in public, one by one, so those names learned to sit with power. Empires die when they forget their edges exist. Cleopatra kept the edges in the story.
And all the while, across the sea, Rome rehearsed itself into empire. Octavian's ambition hardened into procedure. Mark Antony's charisma melted into need. Senators rebranded themselves as loyalists. Loyalists rebranded themselves as patriots. Patriots learned to count. Cleopatra did not try to stop the tide. She mapped how it might flood and where to store the boats. She arranged contingency as an art form, a plan for when grain ships were delayed, a plan for when a general retired more suddenly than his soldiers did, a plan for when a rumor grew teeth. In the palace, she kept a small room where no one else entered, a place for papers and for thinking, and for the kind of prayer that uses no words. Even queens understand fear. The trick is to learn its language and turn it into advice. She wrote in a neat hand, lists more than speeches, debts to settle, husbands to choose for other people, border forts that needed repairs, names of those who had brought her true news and those who had brought her true smiles. Both are rare. Both are valuable. When morning came, the queen dressed not merely for ceremony, but for syntax. Symbols speak. The crown, the wig, the linen, each told the city what kind of day it would be. Some days she wore Egypt like armor. Some days she let the Greek of her lineage show in the drape of a robe. She was not pretending to be one person or the other. She was both. She made both true. By the end of this chapter of her life, when historians would later look back and call it a prelude, Alexandria had learned to breathe with her. The markets relaxed into order. The docks kept time like musicians. The lighthouse fire rose each night with the confidence of a heartbeat. What changed? Not simply that a queen returned and made the city feel less like a stage and more like a home.
The difference seems small until you live it. People sleep differently when they believe morning belongs to them. Power loves to be loud. Cleopatra learned how to let it be quiet. That is how you carry it long distances without dropping pieces. That is how you lead a people through years when other hands would have treated them as a prize to be displayed or a ledger to be corrected. When the messengers finally came with the invitations that would lace her fate to Rome's again, banquets on distant shores, councils in cities that smelled like laurel and iron, she thanked them, scheduled them, and returned to her lists. There's a reason empires underestimate administrators. They mistake patience for passivity. They hear the calm voice and forget it is the one that decided which bridges would still be standing when the army arrived.
Cleopatra stood at the window one more time, the river black and silver under the moon, and imagined her city a century ahead. Would children still race in the courtyard? Would the lighthouse still hold its fire against the wind? Would strangers step off ships and feel they had entered a place where even the stones remembered their names? A queen can plan for many things. The future's manners are not among them. But she could prepare a people to greet it with pride instead of apology. She could keep the granaries full and the clerks honest. She could teach her son the weight of a signature. She could give Alexandria the habit of dignity. And as for Rome, Rome could wait. History has a way of finding those who are ready. The river turned, slowly, like a thought becoming a decision. The city slept, the palace breathed, and somewhere a courier was already on the road with a letter that would bring the next act into focus. For now, the queen closed the shutters and let the night be what it is for everyone, even those who wear crowns, a kind of kindness, a pause between questions, a soft room where power remembers it is only one form of responsibility. Morning would come, and with it the shapes of ships on the horizon.
The tomb that shouldn't have been found. The desert does not forgive, and it does not explain. It buries secrets, presses them into silence, and leaves us to wonder if what we seek is hidden or if it was never there at all. When Cleopatra died, Rome told a story. They said she had lost, her lover dead, her city taken, her fate sealed by her own hand, and a snake hidden in a basket of figs. They said she chose death over humiliation. They left no doubt. And yet they also left nothing. No tomb, no body, no bones to parade through their triumphs. It is in absence that myths thrive. Cleopatra's missing tomb became a wound that never scabbed over. Each age pressed its fingers into the past and felt the ache. A queen who challenged Rome vanished into sand and story. Egyptians inter their royalty with care. The pharaohs' tombs were houses for eternity, chambers carved deep, sealed with spells, painted with blue stars to guide the soul. If Cleopatra followed those traditions, somewhere beneath Egyptian soil lies a room painted with scenes of her offering lotus flowers to Osiris, of Anubis weighing her heart against a feather, of Isis embracing her as a daughter. But Cleopatra was also Greek and Macedonian. Her burial may have blended worlds. Marble sarcophagus instead of granite, silk from India wrapped under linen, scrolls of Homer tucked next to the Book of the Dead. A tomb that told a story of syncretism, Egypt and Greece interwoven as she was. Rome claims she died by snakebite. The asp is theatrical, appropriate for a queen who understood performance. But poison would have been cleaner, simpler, quicker. Some whisper that Octavian ordered her killed and staged a suicide. Each theory leaves a different trail. A snake leaves bones, poison leaves vials, execution leaves silence. If Octavian had truly orchestrated her death, why hide her tomb? Rome delighted in displaying conquered monarchs. Yet Cleopatra was never shown. Her son Caesarion was executed, her other children paraded and absorbed into Rome. Egypt became a province. The queen disappeared. Absence is its own statement. Maybe her tomb was hidden by those who loved her, priests sealing it beneath temple floors, disguising entrances with false walls. Maybe Rome dumped her body in the sea, erasing a shrine before it could exist. Or maybe Cleopatra herself insisted on secrecy, understanding that a tomb unfound would make her unending. The landscapes around Alexandria are patient teachers. Sand dunes shift like slow tides. A single gust could hide a staircase for 1,000 years, or reveal it for one afternoon. Those who search for Cleopatra's tomb walk where no paths exist. They read hills like palimpsests. A mound may be a dune or a collapsed chamber. A crack might be nothing or the breath of a buried hall. Beyond land is the sea. The Mediterranean touches Egypt like a long sigh. Earthquakes shook ancient Alexandria more than once. Whole districts slid into the water. Today, divers glide over toppled columns and sphinxes, fingers brushing hieroglyphs softened by salt. Sunlight turns submerged temples into underwater dreams. If Cleopatra's mausoleum slid into the sea, it now lies beneath silt and seagrass, lit by shafts of filtered light. Then there is Taposiris Magna, the great tomb of Osiris. This temple west of Alexandria has captured imaginations. Archaeologists have unearthed shafts and tunnels, mummies and amulets, coins bearing Cleopatra's profile. Beneath its foundations lie chambers sealed for 2,000 years. To open them is to break promises made by priests to gods. Yet curiosity calls like a siren on stone. Excavations there go slow. Each shovelful is brushed and photographed, each artifact catalogued. Modern archaeologists work under the gaze of ancient deities and modern nations. They carry both trowel and diplomacy. For discovery is not merely scientific, it is political. It raises questions of ownership. If Cleopatra's tomb is found, whose story will it be? Egypt's? Greece's? Rome's? Hollywood's? A missing tomb is not just an archaeological puzzle, it is a geopolitical tinderbox. Local communities have their own relationship with Cleopatra. Some Egyptians view her as a national hero who defied foreign domination. Others see her less malignly than other queens like Hatshepsut or Nefertiti. Modern Egypt weighs heritage with tourism, education with economy. Finding Cleopatra could reshape narratives taught in schools, rewrite museum tours, draw new pilgrimages to Alexandria. Internationally, the missing tomb has become an industry. Each potential clue makes headlines. Scholars debate theories on documentaries. Investors fund digs in exchange for naming rights. Writers spin novels. The absence fuels an economy of speculation. Under all this lies the simple human act of burial. In death, Cleopatra would have become Osiris Triumphant, as pharaohs were called. Her heart, if preserved, would be placed back into her chest with amulets to protect it. Her hair would have been combed, her nails painted with henna. Priests would have recited spells from memory, voices echoing in a chamber lit by flickering lamps. Then the stone would have slid shut. What if, in some hidden chamber, that scene still rests intact? What if her face, wrapped in linen and gold, lies undisturbed, waiting for eyes to peer in? The thought sends a thrill and a chill. For to find her would be to turn myth into dust and bone. It would answer one question and raise many more.
The stories we tell about Cleopatra's tomb reveal as much about us as they do about her. In the 19th century, British explorers imagined her draped in jewels, surrounded by treasures ready to be packed up and shipped to London. Their fantasies mirrored their empire's appetite for artifacts. In Hollywood's golden age, filmmakers imagined a lavish funeral barge, Cleopatra lying on a leopard skin, with torches reflecting off gold leaf. Their visions mirrored their industry's love for spectacle. In academia, theories rose and fell like dynasties. Early scholars trusted Roman accounts. She died by asp and was buried by Romans. Later Egyptologists noted that Roman writers often sacrificed truth for political theater. They revisited the absence of evidence and began to treat silence as a text. Some proposed she was interred near the Temple of Isis at Philae. Others believed Octavian dumped her body into the Mediterranean to erase a locus of pilgrimage. Modern technology added new voices to the debate. Ground-penetrating radar revealed anomalies under desert floors. Satellites scanned landscapes for patterns invisible to human eyes. 3D reconstruction models predicted what a tomb entrance might look like after centuries of erosion. Each new tool promised revelation. Each produced only more possibilities. To imagine Cleopatra's tomb is to imagine layers. There would have been outer chambers for offerings and rituals. The actual burial chamber would have been sealed behind false walls or stone plugs. It might have been lined with granite or decorated with gold leaf.
Inscriptions would have told a story not of defeat but of rebirth, aligning Cleopatra with Isis, with Osiris, with Ma'at. If she included Greek texts, they might have quoted Homer or Pindar, linking her to Hellenic wisdom. Her coffin could have been carved with Greek letters spelling Kleos, glory. And what of Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar? Did she intend to be buried beside him? Caesarion was killed shortly after her death, but his burial place is also lost. If a tomb held both mother and son, it would stand as a statement against Rome's erasure, a family united in death when the living world would not allow it. Finding such a tomb would be explosive, rewriting not only Cleopatra's story, but Caesar's lineage. The longer the tomb remains hidden, the larger the story grows. Cleopatra is no longer just a historical figure. She is a screen onto which each era projects its anxieties and desires. In a world fascinated with powerful women, she becomes an icon of female leadership. In a world suspicious of media spin, she becomes a symbol of narrative control. Rome told one story, but her missing tomb tells another.
Link the discovery to Rome's history. Museums will make lists of artifacts they hope to borrow. Television crews will camp at the site. Documentaries will be pitched before the chamber is fully mapped. Tourists will book flights to Alexandria, hoping to be among the first to walk where she walked. Money will flow. Governments will allocate funds for preservation. Companies will sponsor exhibitions. Academics will secure grants to study inscriptions, mummies, textiles. The local economy might boom. Hotels, restaurants, guides. But with that money come pressures. How many visitors can the site endure without damage? How quickly should the tomb be opened to the public? Should some chambers remain private for scientific study? Who decides? There is another layer of economy, propaganda. For Egypt's government, revealing Cleopatra's tomb could boost national pride and political legitimacy. For external powers, it might be used to argue historical ties or lay claims to artifacts. Rome's empire may have ended millennia ago, but the empire of narrative is alive. Whoever controls Cleopatra's tomb will control how her story is framed for the next century. In the end, one must return to the queen herself. Cleopatra was a master of narrative. She cultivated her image carefully, aligning with Isis to appeal to Egyptians, speaking Greek to appeal to scholars, seducing Rome not just with charm, but with resources. She understood that legacy is not only about deeds, but about the stories told after you are gone. Perhaps in planning her burial, she thought about how to shape that story. Maybe she chose to link her tomb to Osiris because he was the god of resurrection. Maybe she requested anonymity so Rome could not desecrate her memory.
Maybe she set spells to confuse future seekers. Maybe she simply wanted to rest in peace, free from the gaze of conquerors and speculators. Time itself could be seen as her ally. Earthquakes, floods, and the shifting Nile delta may have done for her what no priest could: hide her from those who would use her. Alexandria has been rebuilt repeatedly. Foundations have been relaid. Columns have been repurposed. Entire neighborhoods have disappeared under silt. If Cleopatra's tomb lies within the ancient city, it may now be under a modern street or a football field. To find it might require displacing people, an ethical dilemma. Earthquakes in 365 CE and 1303 CE were particularly devastating. Ancient sources describe walls collapsing and the sea engulfing the shore. Underwater archaeologists have mapped debris from those events. They found pieces of the lighthouse of Alexandria, giant blocks of limestone, sphinxes, obelisks. Each block tells a story of sudden violence. Somewhere among them, perhaps, is a piece of Cleopatra's final home.
The longer the tomb remains lost, the more it sits at the intersection of mythology and science. It becomes an idea rather than a place. It forces us to imagine Cleopatra as both present and absent, tangible and elusive. It challenges our desire to know everything. Can we accept that some mysteries endure? Or will we dig forever, risking destruction in pursuit of closure? Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Cleopatra's missing tomb is how it mirrors her reign. She ruled by blending worlds, by balancing contradictions, by turning absence into presence. She hid her weaknesses, revealed her strengths, and kept her opponents guessing. Now, in death, she does the same. We see her in statues and coins, yet cannot find her. We read texts about her, yet cannot hear her. She remains both known and unknown, alive in imagination. Scholars will continue to debate. Archaeologists will continue to dig. Satellite images will be scrutinized. Ground will be scanned. Divers will descend. Each false lead will spark a new theory. Each rumor will feed a new documentary. Meanwhile, Cleopatra herself, whether in some hidden chamber or nowhere at all, will remain a queen of storytelling, shaping conversations from beyond. And if one day a door is opened and a chamber is revealed, what then? Will we finally know Cleopatra? We will see how she was laid out, what objects she was buried with, what texts she chose to accompany her. We may confirm her age at death, her lineage through DNA, her health through bone analysis. We may confirm if cesarean lies with her. But we will not know the thoughts behind those choices. We will not know whether she saw the sea one last time before entering her tomb. We will not hear her final words to her attendants.
We will not feel the weight of Rome bearing down on her as she wrote her will. Those remain in the realm of story, where Cleopatra has always been most alive. Perhaps that is fitting. A queen who mastered narrative deserves to have her last chapter remain partly in shadow. Her tomb, if it exists, becomes not an answer, but a symbol of the unfinished, the unsolved, the eternal. It invites each generation to step close, to lean in and whisper, "What if?" The sand will continue to move, the sea will continue to sigh, Alexandria will continue to hum with life and rumor. Somewhere, beneath a dune, under a street, or perhaps not at all, the tomb that shouldn't have been found will continue to be found. In stories, in dreams, in the spaces between facts. Until then, Cleopatra's ghost walks with archaeologists as they draw trowels across desert surfaces. She swims with divers through submerged columns. She sits with historians by the glow of laptop screens. Not as a memory, but as a question mark. Not as a body, but as a catalyst. And that may be her greatest legacy, a mystery powerful enough to outlast Rome, earthquakes, looters, scholars, and time itself.
The Lovers and the Ledger. Love in royal courts is never just love. It is always entangled with ledgers, borders, and the quiet agreements that keep empires afloat. Cleopatra knew this, perhaps better than anyone. When Julius Caesar sailed to Alexandria chasing his rival Pompey, he found not only a city of marble and papyrus, but a queen in exile, waiting for her moment. Their story is told in legends of rolled carpets and midnight meetings, but beneath the romance there was a calculation as precise as any account book. Caesar arrived with ambition and debt. His campaigns in Gaul had won him fame and enemies. His pursuit of Pompey had emptied coffers. The Roman treasury was low. Cleopatra possessed what Caesar needed most, grain and gold. Egypt's harvest fed Rome's poor and its soldiers. Egypt's temples held reserves that could finance wars. Caesar, in turn, possessed armies and legitimacy, a force Cleopatra needed to reclaim her throne. When they met, there was attraction, but there was also arithmetic. The queen offered resources and loyalty. The general offered protection and recognition. Caesar reinstated Cleopatra as queen. Cleopatra funded Caesar's next moves. The alliance had children. Caesarion, the son who would embody both Roman and Egyptian bloodlines. It also had conspirators. Romans whispered that Cleopatra's wealth had bought Caesar's favor. Egyptians whispered that Caesar's armies kept Cleopatra's throne warm. Caesar brought Cleopatra to Rome. She lived not in the heart of the city. She could not, as a foreign queen, but in a villa across the Tiber. From there, she watched Senate debates and city festivals. She met writers and philosophers, but she was also a walking question mark. Was she a guest or a hostage? A partner or a trophy? She arrived with servants and scholars,
musicians, and priests, reminding Romans that she was not a provincial ruler, but a monarch who could command Alexandria's resources with a nod. The Senate grumbled. Pamphlets circulated depicting Cleopatra as a sorceress. Romans made jokes about a foreign queen enchanting their leader with exotic luxuries. But while they laughed, Caesar and Cleopatra discussed logistics. How many ships could sail before winter? How many wagons of grain could be loaded before the Nile receded? How much gold could be extracted from temple treasuries without angering the gods? Love and ledgers intertwined. Each kiss carried a calculation.
Cleopatra's presence in Rome was unsettling, not because of her beauty, but because of what she represented, a different model of power. Roman women rarely governed. They wielded influence behind closed doors, their names absent from state documents. Cleopatra sat at banquets, across from senators and generals. She spoke Greek with poets, Egyptian with priests, Latin with courtiers. She did not hide behind a curtain. This was seductive to some, frightening to others. Caesar commissioned a statue of Cleopatra as Venus Genitrix and placed it in the Temple of Venus. Romans rolled their eyes. Some rolled their daggers. When Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, conspirators declared they had freed Rome from tyranny. But Cleopatra saw that Rome had freed itself from stability. The alliance she had crafted vanished in a torrent of knives. She did not panic. She left Rome quietly, like a tide receding. She returned to Alexandria with Caesarion. She did not return empty-handed. She carried with her knowledge of Rome's weaknesses, its hunger for grain, its thirst for gold, its susceptibility to propaganda. She had watched senators promise the Republic while arranging private deals. She had seen generals who would sell their loyalty for coin. In a ledger, she noted names. Back in Egypt, she plotted. Rome was a hydra. Cut off one head and another grew. She watched Mark Antony rise. Antony had been Caesar's loyal friend and general. He was charismatic, reckless, generous, and often in debt. His appetite for lavish feasts and public games was legendary. His idea of diplomacy was to drink wine with kings until dawn. Cleopatra, hearing of his new position as triumvir, saw opportunity. Antony needed Egypt's wealth. Egypt needed Rome's military support. The equation rebalanced. When Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, she sailed up the Cydnus River in a spectacle. Her barge smelled of incense and roses. Purple sails billowed. Musicians played. She was dressed as Aphrodite, goddess of love and war. The message was clear. I am not an exile. I am a goddess. Antony, a lover of theater, was delighted. But again, behind the performance was a ledger. Cleopatra would provide cash to pay Antony's soldiers and navy. Antony would support Cleopatra's claim to the throne and protect Egypt from Rome's tax collectors. Antony spent the winter with Cleopatra in Alexandria. They hunted, fished, and drank. They laughed at philosophers, watched plays, and threw coins from the balconies into the crowd. They also strategized. Antony prepared his campaign against Parthia. Cleopatra calculated the costs. Ships needed wood and rope. Soldiers needed food and pay. Weapons needed metal. Cleopatra opened the granaries and treasury. Antony promised territory. Cleopatra gave him grain.
Antony named her Queen of Kings. Cleopatra gave him gold. Love flowed like the Nile. So did money. In 34 BCE, after a victorious parade in Alexandria, Antony stood on a platform with Cleopatra by his side. In an event now called the Donations of Alexandria, Antony distributed lands to Cleopatra's children. To Caesarion he gave the title King of Kings, and territories in Syria, Phoenicia, and Cilicia. To the twins he had with Cleopatra, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, he gave Armenia, Media, and Cyrenaica. To their younger brother, Ptolemy Philadelphus, he gave parts of Syria and Asia Minor. Octavian was outraged, not because he cared for those territories, but because Antony was publicly aligning Rome's Eastern Empire with Egypt. The propaganda machine whirred. Octavian circulated Antony's will, or perhaps a forgery, claiming that Antony planned to be buried in Alexandria beside Cleopatra. He declared Antony had given Roman territory to a foreign queen. He told Romans that Antony wanted to move the capital to Alexandria. The subtext, Rome's money and power were being siphoned off by an Egyptian seductress. Octavian's outrage was theatrical but effective. Romans are pragmatists. They are also nationalists. They worry about grain shipments and tax revenues. They listened when Octavian spoke of missing shipments. They read the will and gasped. They clutched their wallets when Octavian told them Antony and Cleopatra were about to steal their inheritance. Love was recast as treason. The ledger recast as robbery. Meanwhile, Cleopatra and Antony continued their financial dance. Cleopatra minted coins in Alexandria showing her face. Antony minted coins showing his. Trade routes flourished. Taxes were collected. Temples were refurbished. Cleopatra's picture on coinage was deliberate. Her nose, strong and distinctive, dominated the coin. It was a statement. I am not just a consort, I am a ruler. Antony's coins, struck in the east, bore his head facing Cleopatra's, equal in size. It was radical iconography. Two sovereigns side by side. Money flowed from Alexandria to Antioch and Armenia, to Cyprus and Crete. It funded military campaigns and city festivals. It paid for amphitheaters and docks. Cleopatra understood that to keep Antony loyal, she had to keep his troops fed. Antony understood that to keep Cleopatra loyal, he had to keep her throne intact. Their intimacy was sealed with coins and contracts as much as with kisses. The children born of their union were more than heirs. They were political messages. Twins named after the sun and the moon. A son named after brotherly love. Each baby was a symbol of worlds merged, Rome's military might and Egypt's divine heritage. Each child required a future. That future required resources. Queens and generals think in generations. Lovers think in heartbeats. Cleopatra and Antony were both. Antony's campaign against Parthia in 36 BCE was a disaster. Armies starved in the Armenian mountains, horses died, soldiers froze. Cleopatra sent supplies, but the distances were long and the timing off. The retreat battered Antony's prestige. He returned to Alexandria weakened. Cleopatra met him not with accusation, but with comfort. She paid bonuses to his soldiers. She threw feasts to distract from losses. She built a gymnasium in Alexandria for the veterans. She turned failure into loyalty with coin and bread. But the ledger did not forget. War drains treasuries. Cleopatra's coffers were wide, but not infinite. Temples protested when their gold was borrowed. Merchants grumbled when taxes rose. Farmers complained when levies increased. A queen walking through the markets could feel it. Cleopatra listened. She adjusted tax rates. She reopened canal projects. She sent priests to bless the fields. She understood that goodwill from subjects flows from the stomach to the heart. While Alexandria mended, Rome fumed. Octavian's propaganda sharpened. He spoke of Cleopatra sitting on a throne of silver while Roman citizens lined up for bread. He spoke of taxes taken from Italian farmers to fund Egyptian luxuries. He printed coins that showed Octavian on one side and an allusion to Caesar on the other, reminding Romans who brought their prosperity. Octavian's ledger balanced at Cleopatra's expense. He knew a good villain when he saw one. Cleopatra responded quietly. She sent envoys to eastern cities, reminding them of the benefits of her rule: stable trade, fair courts, grain security. She lowered tariffs on goods from Judea and Arabia. She offered grain shipments at reduced prices to Aegean islands. In crises, she distributed bread from palace storehouses. She understood that goodwill must be purchased over and over. A queen must be part baker and part banker. Antony, perhaps, did not see the danger accumulating. He loved Cleopatra and Alexandria. He loved their life of music and hunting. He was less attentive to Rome's slowly boiling anger. Cleopatra saw it. She counted the coins. She measured shipments. She paid spies for news. Her ledger did not lie. Rome was preparing to act. She might have counseled retreat, negotiation, a scaling down of grandeur, but time and fate rarely offer easy exits. She and Antony had taken too much, promised too much, owned too much together. Their ledger was too interwoven to simply untie. As the years turned, Cleopatra's relationships with Caesar and Antony illustrate a pattern: love as strategy, strategy as survival. She did not seduce for pleasure alone, but because seduction could alter maps. She did not open her treasury because she enjoyed spending, but because money was a tool sharper than any sword. She did not bear children as trophies, but as claims. In each case, ledger and heart sat together at the table. It would be easy to paint Cleopatra as cold and calculating, reducing affection to numbers. That is not the case. Accounts of their interactions hint at genuine laughter and shared joy. Cleopatra's humor was reportedly quick and biting. Antony's charm was legendary. They hunted boar and read poetry. They gambled and played dice. They drank wine and argued about Homer. They wrote to each other in verse. They kissed under fig trees. Love and leisure can coexist. Cleopatra's genius was knowing that in a world ruled by men and armies, love without accounts was a liability. Conspiracies swirl around Cleopatra's romances. Some say her children were part of a plan to bind Caesar and Antony forever to her. Others believe she orchestrated their deaths to clear Caesarion's path. There is no evidence for such claims. Cleopatra did not need conspiracies. She had circumstances. She lived at a crossroads where one empire consumed another. Her choices were not between good and evil, but between survival and obliteration. She adapted. As segment 3 closes, Cleopatra and Antony stand on a precipice. Octavian watches from Rome, ledger open, counting ships and loyalties. The queen knows that ledgers are about to be tested on a battlefield. Behind the love stories, money has been flowing like the Nile, carrying them toward a confrontation. The next chapter will not be a banquet or a poem, it will be Actium, a bay in Greece, a line of ships, and the moment where love and ledgers meet the hard edge of history. For Cleopatra, it will be another audition, not as lover or administrator, but as commander. The ledger entries will be replaced by ship's logs. The coins will be replaced by cannonballs. The children will be left in Alexandria, and the queen will sail into battle, knowing that the cost is everything. And Octavian? He will watch, calculating grain stocks and tax receipts, waiting for the moment when he can claim not just Egypt's wealth, but its story.
The Fall of a Queen. By 32 BCE, the tension between Rome's factions had hardened into inevitability. Cleopatra and Mark Antony stood on one side with Egypt's wealth and an Eastern power base. Octavian, Caesar's grandnephew, stood on the other with Senate backing and a propaganda machine that portrayed Antony as a traitor enthralled by an Egyptian queen. Rome no longer whispered, it roared. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide not just who ruled Egypt, but who ruled the Mediterranean. Cleopatra understood that the coming war would not be decided in Alexandria's courtyards or on Senate floors. It would be fought where ships meet wind and fire. Egypt's shipyards strained to build war galleys. Antony gathered veterans, sailors, and supplies. Cleopatra personally outfitted 60 ships, sleek and swift. She knew the sea. It had defended Egypt for centuries. Antony's fleet was heavier, built for ramming and boarding. Together, they believed they could match Octavian's smaller but more agile navy, led by his Admiral Agrippa. As they prepared, Octavian worked not just with oars and sails, but with words.
He distributed Antony's will, real or forged, to the Roman people, emphasizing its bequests to Cleopatra and their children. He depicted Antony as planning to move Rome's capital to Alexandria. He told farmers that their grain would soon feed Egyptians. Love became treason. Partnership became seduction. Rome's fear of Eastern influence was sharpened into hate. Propaganda can sink ships before they leave harbor. Cleopatra and Antony sailed to Actium, a bay on the western coast of Greece. It was a strategic choice. A narrow entrance limited flanking maneuvers, and nearby ports supplied their army. Their camp buzzed with politics and logistics. Envoys came and went, spies whispered, priests prayed. Cleopatra walked among the ships, examining hulls, speaking to captains, offering sacrifices to Isis and Poseidon. She was not a mascot, she was commander. She knew that if Rome won, Egypt would not just lose a battle, it would cease to exist as an independent kingdom.
The morning of September 2nd, 31 BCE, dawned windless and heavy. Antony's fleet sailed out in a long line, heavy quinqueremes with towers bristling with archers. Cleopatra's lighter ships waited at the rear, their prows carved like swan necks, painted bright. On shore, Antony's infantry lined up in full armor, watching the sea as if their gaze alone could turn tide. Across the water, Agrippa's ships moved in tight formations, smaller but swifter. Octavian watched from a hill, not as a general, but as the man who would claim the narrative. Naval battles are chaos. Oars splash, orders are shouted, smoke and arrows fill the air. Antony's ships attempted to close and grapple to turn the fight into hand-to-hand combat. Agrippa's captains darted in and out, setting fires, cutting ropes, avoiding the heavier rams. Cleopatra's ships held position, waiting for a signal. Hours passed. Supplies dwindled. Water grew scarce. Disease had already thinned Antony's crew. Morale was fragile. Somewhere in the smoke and confusion, Cleopatra saw the balance shift. Perhaps she saw Agrippa's ships peeling off to encircle their flank. Perhaps she feared a trap. Or perhaps she decided that saving her fleet and treasure for another day was the only path left. Suddenly, Cleopatra's squadron broke formation, unfurled its purple sails, and caught the wind back toward Egypt. Her ships cut through the melee like dolphins, moving with practiced speed. Antony, seeing Cleopatra retreat, faced a decision between love and command. He chose love, or maybe he chose what he thought was strategy. He abandoned the fight and followed her. On the shore, his infantry watched in disbelief as their leaders sailed away. Discipline faltered. Octavian's forces surged forward, capitalizing on the chaos. Antony's fleet was overwhelmed. The battle was lost not just because ships sank, but because trust did. Soldiers who believed they were fighting for Rome now saw their general sail after a queen. Propaganda met prophecy. Cleopatra's decision has been debated for centuries. Was it fear, strategy, betrayal, a plan agreed upon with Antony? What we know is this: she sailed away with a substantial portion of Egypt's navy intact. She carried treasure and documents, perhaps her remaining hope. Antony's escape saved him from immediate capture, but it cost him his army's confidence. Actium became less a naval loss and more a psychological one. Octavian's narrative was ready. Antony had fled with Cleopatra, abandoned his troops, proved Rome's accusations. Love became failure. The ledger became empty. The die was cast.
Cleopatra and Antony returned to Alexandria not as conquerors, but as survivors. Alexandria greeted them with incense and song, but whispers lingered. Cleopatra resumed her role as administrator. She reopened storehouses and soothed merchants. She oversaw repairs to defenses, knowing Octavian would come. Antony sank into despondency. His confidence, once his currency, dwindled. Reports arrived daily, legions deserting, allies capitulating, Rome unifying behind Octavian. Cleopatra was familiar with despair. Exile had taught her to use it as fuel. She would not surrender Egypt without a price. She prepared contingencies. She hid her treasures in secret chambers. She rehearsed negotiations in her mind. Octavian marched on Egypt in 30 BCE. His forces surrounded Alexandria by land and sea. Antony attempted one last stand, charging out with cavalry and foot soldiers. At first, success. Roman lines broke. But a messenger delivered false news to Antony that Cleopatra had already taken her life in despair. Believing his love dead, Antony fell on his sword. He did not die immediately. He was brought, bleeding, to a mausoleum Cleopatra had constructed for herself. There they saw each other one last time. He died in her arms. It is a scene that has inspired painters and poets. Blood on linen, whispers of regret, the meeting of love and death.
Cleopatra was now alone. She negotiated with Octavian. Accounts vary. Some say she attempted to seduce him. He refused. Others say she offered treasure. He accepted, but demanded her surrender. She asked for Egypt to remain independent. Octavian declined. She asked for her children's safety. Some were spared, others not. She tried to convince Octavian that Egypt's grain harvest would flow easier with her alive. Octavian listened, but also calculated public perception. He could not risk Rome seeing him as lenient toward a woman blamed for Rome's civil war. Whether Cleopatra intended to die from the start or as a last resort, she made preparations. She tested poisons on prisoners to find a painless method. She wrote letters, arranged her will, sent Caesarion east with trusted servants. She retreated to her mausoleum and sealed herself inside. Octavian's envoys arrived too late. Cleopatra lay on a golden couch. Beside her, two of her closest servants lay dead. A basket of figs sat on the floor. Accounts say a cobra, small and concealed, had been smuggled in. Other accounts suggest she used a hairpin dipped in poison. The image of the asp is theatrical, fitting for a queen who understood the power of imagery. Poison would have been easier to hide. The truth remains hidden behind funeral cloth.
Octavian, upon finding Cleopatra dead, was both relieved and vexed. He had wanted to display her in his triumph in Rome, a living trophy proving his conquest. Now he had her body. He gave orders that she be buried with Antony, fulfilling at least the rumor spread by Antony's will. Perhaps he thought it merciful. Perhaps he thought it a narrative device. Two lovers dead by their own hands, empire saved from foreign entanglements. He confiscated her treasures, but he did not burn her body. He understood that Rome's masses still revered Isis and Osiris. A desecrated queen might enrage them. Caesarion was captured and executed. Octavian could not allow a boy who claimed descent from Julius Caesar to survive. Cleopatra's other children were taken to Rome and raised by Octavia, Antony's former wife. Egypt was annexed. It went from being a sovereign kingdom to a province, Rome's breadbasket. Egypt's administration now reported not to a queen, but to a governor. Alexandria's scholars continued to write, but now under Roman oversight. Cleopatra's gods became Rome's gods. The Ptolemaic dynasty ended not with a famine or an invasion, but with paper and pen. With one death, centuries of independent rule evaporated. Octavian returned to Rome and took the title Augustus. The Republic became an empire. The Senate still met, but real power lay with one man. Cleopatra's defeat paved the way for Augustus's success. Romans celebrated. Coins were minted depicting crocodiles and palm trees, symbols of Egypt, with Latin inscriptions praising Augustus. Temples were built, parades were held. Cleopatra's story was told with a smile, a cautionary tale about foreign queens and seductive wealth. She became a villain in speeches, a danger in plays, an exotic in art. Rome wrote history. Egypt whispered different endings. Egyptians continued to honor Cleopatra. She became part of local cults. Her image persisted in Isis temples for centuries.
Greek writers in Alexandria recorded anecdotes about her wisdom and wit. In time, Cleopatra became less a queen and more an archetype. Medieval Arab historians debated her knowledge of alchemy and astrology. Renaissance painters romanticized her. Modern cinema glamorized her. Through all those retellings, one truth remained. Her final acts were her own. She died as she lived, deciding her narrative. The Battle of Actium did not just end a war, it ended an era. It marked the transition from Rome's fractious republic to Augustus's autocratic empire. It marked the end of Hellenistic monarchies. It allowed Rome to control Egypt's grain, which fed its population for centuries. It gave Augustus the wealth to pay his legions and secure his power. It turned Cleopatra and Antony into cautionary figures used to justify one-man rule. It set a stage on which imperial propaganda would thrive for generations. Yet Cleopatra's story persists because it is larger than politics. It is a story of a woman navigating a world built by men. It is a story of love that refused to separate from strategy. It is a story of a queen who understood that the written word could outlast swords. It is a story of misjudged motives, of cultures colliding, of narratives crafted to serve rulers. Cleopatra's choices, aligning with Caesar, partnering with Antony, negotiating with Octavian, choosing her death, were not random. They were calculated responses to a world that offered her few options and fewer allies. Her defeat does not diminish her intelligence or courage. The ledger she kept, in grain, gold, alliances, ships, was real. The love she felt, whether for Caesar or Antony or her children or Egypt itself, was real. The myth Rome created about her is a separate ledger. She remains a figure who can inspire and warn, seduce and repel, invite reverence and revision. Her tomb may be missing, but her story is not.
Cleopatra's Echo, From Propaganda to Legend. When Cleopatra's body was placed in its tomb, wherever it lies, her story did not end. In some ways, it began anew. Rome had won the war, but now Octavian needed to win the memory. He could not allow Cleopatra to become a martyr or a heroine. He needed her to become a cautionary tale. Propaganda flowed as surely as the Nile. Pamphlets, speeches, coins, and histories all painted Cleopatra not as a sovereign, but as a seductress, a dangerous foreigner who had bewitched a Roman general and nearly stole an empire. This image of Cleopatra as a femme de fatale has its origins in Roman propaganda. Octavian's narrative presented Cleopatra as decadent and debauched, the opposite of Roman virtue. She was portrayed dripping in gold, lying on leopard skins, feeding grapes to lovers. He used her foreignness, her Macedonian ancestry, and Egyptian throne to stoke xenophobia. Romans, who might have pitied a queen fighting for her kingdom, instead saw a siren whose death was justice. Coins minted by Octavian showed crocodiles and palms to symbolize Egypt subdued. Poems mocked Cleopatra for her perfumes and Eastern luxury. The contrast was clear. Rome was disciplined. Cleopatra
was indulgent. It was a political message disguised as morality. This portrayal persisted. Ancient historians like Plutarch and Cassius Dio, writing under Roman rule, repeated Octavian's themes. They described Cleopatra as manipulative. Her intellect turned toward seduction rather than strategy. They minimized her ability as a linguist, a diplomat, a scholar. They highlighted rumors that she used magical charms and potions. They rarely acknowledged her reforms or governance. Even sympathetic accounts could not escape Rome's framework. Cleopatra became a mirror onto which Roman authors projected anxieties about women and power.
Over centuries, Cleopatra's image shifted with each retelling. Medieval Arab historians admired her knowledge of alchemy and engineering. They called her a philosopher, a builder of monuments, a patron of sciences. Renaissance humanists, rediscovering Greek and Roman texts, returned Cleopatra to the stage. In the 16th and 17th centuries, playwrights such as William Shakespeare and Jean-Baptiste Cléopâtre Victoire, better known as Cleopatra Captive, reimagined her. Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra transformed her from a seductive villain into a tragic heroine, passionate, witty, flawed, and noble. She was no longer just a threat to Rome. She was a woman who loved and lost, who refused to be captured, who died as sweet as balm. His portrayal reinforced the romantic narrative, but also humanized her, giving her speeches of rage and regret, humor and dignity. Yet even Shakespeare leaned on Roman sources for plot and tone. The Cleopatra of his play still enters on a barge of gold and purple. She still melts the hearts of men. She is still blamed for Antony's downfall. Shakespeare's Cleopatra is complex, but still rooted in the seductive stereotype. That stereotype filtered into art and opera. Painters like Lawrence Alma Tadema and Alexandra Cabanel depicted Cleopatra reclining on couches, surrounded by servants, holding an asp with theatrical flourish. Operas by Handel and Massenet set her story to music drenched in passion. The image persisted. Cleopatra as drama. Cleopatra as spectacle. In the 20th century, Hollywood seized the story. The 1934 film starring Claudette Colbert portrayed Cleopatra as cunning yet playful. The 1963 epic with Elizabeth Taylor presented her as a glamorous queen, wrapped in gold and eyeliner. These films reinforced the blend of exoticism and seduction. They magnified the idea of Cleopatra as the original femme fatale, beautiful, dangerous, irresistible. Scholars pushed back. In the 20th and 21st centuries, historians began to peel away layers of propaganda. They re-examined coins, papyri, and inscriptions. They noted Cleopatra's accomplishments, reviving Egypt's economy, expanding trade, stabilizing currency, funding temples, supporting scholarship. They pointed out that Cleopatra was the only Ptolemy to learn Egyptian. They highlighted her naval strategies and her political acumen. They argued that the femme fatale narrative served Roman politics more than historical truth. The portrayal of Cleopatra as dangerously seductive had its roots in Roman propaganda, not her actual deeds. Modern writers, both academic and popular, now present Cleopatra as a multilingual leader, a skilled administrator, a religious innovator who embraced both Greek and Egyptian traditions. Stacy Schiff's biography, Cleopatra, A Life, emphasizes her intelligence and statesmanship. Historians highlight her resilience. She survived palace plots, Roman civil wars, and famine. She negotiated with two of Rome's greatest men and leveraged their needs for her country's benefit. They acknowledge her charisma, but focus more on her calculus. Love was part of her toolkit, so were grain shipments and coinage reforms. Cleopatra has also become a symbol of female power. Feminists reclaim her as an example of a woman who dared to rule in a patriarchal world. Artists and novelists explore her life beyond the male gaze, imagining her friendships, her childhood, her motherhood. She appears in children's books as a scientist and linguist. She appears in young adult novels as a warrior and strategist. She appears in video games and comics. Each reimagining says as much about our time as about hers. The conversation about Cleopatra's identity intersects with debates about race and representation. Cleopatra was Greek by descent, ruling a kingdom in Africa populated by Egyptians, Nubians, Jews, Greeks, Romans, and others. Her family intermarried within their Macedonian line, but they also adopted Egyptian customs. Modern discussions ask, was Cleopatra black, Greek, mixed? The answer is complex, tied to colonial histories and modern politics. Few ancient sources describe her skin color. Coins depict her with a prominent nose and strong chin, but artistic conventions of the time are not photographs. Each era projects its own understanding of identity onto her face. In truth, Cleopatra was many things, a blend of cultures embodied in one person. She defies simple categories, which is part of why she endures. Technology even enters her story. Gene sequencing of mummies might someday reveal more about her ancestry. Ground-penetrating radar may locate her tomb. Social media allows Egyptians and Greeks to reclaim her narrative, challenging Western depictions. Cleopatra's story is not just a window into the past, it is a mirror reflecting our present. Octavian's propaganda painted Cleopatra as dangerous. Plutarch wrote her into Roman cautionary tales. Shakespeare wrote her into tragedy. Hollywood wrote her into romance. Scholars now write her into history. Children's books write her into inspiration. She lives simultaneously as villain and heroine, scholar and seductress, icon and enigma. The layers of narrative wrap around her like mummy linens, preserving and distorting, protecting and constraining. To navigate these layers requires empathy and skepticism. It means understanding that all histories are written by someone with intentions. Octavian wanted to justify conquest. Plutarch wanted to moralize. Shakespeare wanted to entertain. We might want to inspire. Cleopatra herself wanted to survive. Her image becomes whatever story we need. She is a canvas on which we paint our attitudes about gender, power, race, and empire. So how should we remember Cleopatra? Perhaps the answer lies in embracing contradiction. She was wise and ruthless, generous and calculating. She loved, but she also used love. She wore crowns, but she also wrote lists. She built ships and libraries. She led armies and read poems. She spoke languages and read stars. She was born in a palace, died in a mausoleum, and lives in our imaginations. Her legacy has been a battleground for millennia. It will likely remain one. Each new biography, movie, or school lesson will reinterpret her. Some will emphasize her romance, others will focus on her reforms. Some will reclaim her as African, others will emphasize her Greekness. The debates themselves are part of her power. Cleopatra invites us to question not just who she was, but how we tell stories about women, about foreigners, about those who lose wars. At the end of this segment, remember Octavian's snake, Plutarch's pen, Shakespeare's quill. Remember the coins pressed with her profile. Remember the boots that never returned from Actium. Remember the ledger Cleopatra kept and the love she felt. Remember that somewhere, perhaps under a village or under the sea, there might be a tomb with gold leaf flaking off linen. Remember that the asp may have been a metaphor. Remember that history is a narrative, a ledger of its own. After Cleopatra's death, Egypt no longer belonged to its people. It became a Roman province. Grain silos feeding an empire, statues melted into coins, temples repurposed for foreign gods. Alexandria, once the city of scholars and sailors, bent to Roman governors. The last echo of the Ptolemies was not a coronation or a feast, but the sound of locks closing on Cleopatra's mausoleum. Rome celebrated. Octavian became Augustus. Coins glittered with victory. Yet in the silence of Egypt, whispers carried another story. The queen was gone, but her choices lingered. She had bargained with love, with money, with power. She had played the game with the tools she had, and in doing so, she carved her name into time. Legends spread. Some said Cleopatra had cursed her conquerors. Others said she lived on, hidden in a chamber sealed with gold. Priests told stories of her wisdom, merchants of her fairness, sailors of her courage. Rome wrote her as a cautionary tale, but Egyptians remembered her as something more. A queen who refused to kneel. A woman who bent emperors to pause and listen. And across the centuries, the image reshaped itself. Medieval scholars painted her as an alchemist, Renaissance poets crowned her tragic muse. Modern cinema wrapped her in gold and eyeliner. Each age invented a Cleopatra to fit its fears and desires. Her tomb remained hidden, maybe by chance, maybe by design. But the absence itself became part of her power.
What do we take from her story? That empires rise and fall not only with armies, but with ledgers, with words, with whispers. That power is a mask, and survival is often the art of wearing it well. That love and politics are never separate ledgers, but two columns on the same page. And above all, that nothing, not marble, not coin, not even the crowns of pharaohs, lasts forever. Cleopatra lived with brilliance and died with defiance. She reminds us that history is not just facts on parchment, but choices made under pressure. Moments when silence could be safer, but words carried further. She reminds us that to rule is to risk, and to love is to gamble. Cleopatra is gone, her tomb still hidden, her empire long dust. Yet her story still bends the world around her. That is power. And you, sitting here now, carry the same truth. You may not build pyramids, but you can build meaning. You may not wear a crown, but you decide the weight of your name. History asks the same question to everyone. Will you leave echoes or silence?